The 20-pound landscaping boulder sailed through the air with surprising grace before crashing through the windshield of Brad Morrison's pristine Tesla Model S with a sound like a crystalline explosion. Karen Whitfield stood frozen on her manicured lawn, her HOA president badge still pinned crookedly to her designer cardigan, watching safety glass cascade onto the white leather interior like deadly confetti. "Oh my God," she whispered, then louder, "Oh my God." The second shocking moment came when Brad's car alarm began shrieking, joined by the symphony of 3 other car alarms triggered by the impact. The entire Willowbrook Estates development seemed to vibrate with mechanical panic. Karen's hands flew to her ears as she watched her neighbor's front doors begin to crack open like suspicious eyes. But the third moment, the one that would haunt her dreams, was when she spotted Brad himself jogging around the corner, his daily 6 a.m. run cut short by the cacophony. His face transformed from confusion to absolute horror as he saw his $80,000 vehicle's decimated windshield. "Karen!" Brad's voice cracked like a whip across the morning air. "What the hell did you do?" 20 minutes earlier, Karen had been conducting her routine morning patrol, clipboard in hand, documenting violations with the systematic precision of a military inspection. The Hendersons' trash cans were 3 inches too far from the curb. The Patels had committed the cardinal sin of leaving their garage door open overnight. But it was Brad's Tesla, parked brazenly in the visitor's spot outside his own home, that had pushed her past the breaking point. She'd knocked on his door, no answer, called his phone, straight to voicemail, left a sternly worded note under his windshield wiper. But the Tesla remained, mocking her authority, violating Section 4.7c of the HOA bylaws she'd memorized better than her own wedding vows. "I warned him," Karen muttered, circling the vehicle like a predator. The landscaping boulder had been sitting there, innocent and decorative, part of the community's xeriscaping initiative she'd spearheaded last spring. It seemed to call to her, begging to be useful for once. Now, watching Brad's face cycle through disbelief, rage, and something approaching homicidal fury, Karen felt the first crack in her certainty. The boulder had seemed so reasonable 5 minutes ago. A dramatic statement, a necessary escalation, a way to finally get these people's attention about the rules that held their community together. "You completely lost your mind," Brad screamed, his jogging clothes drenched in stress sweat. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" Karen straightened her shoulders, clutching her clipboard like armor. "You were parked illegally in a visitor's space, Mr. Morrison. I sent 3 warnings. I followed protocol." "Protocol? Protocol?" Brad's laugh had a manic edge. "You threw a rock through my windshield." "It's a landscaping feature," Karen corrected primly, though her voice wavered. "And it's a boulder." Mrs. Chen emerged from the house across the street, her phone already pressed to her ear. "Yes, 911? I need to report property destruction in Willowbrook Estates." Karen's stomach dropped as she realized the true magnitude of her situation. This wasn't just about parking violations anymore. This was about insurance claims, police reports, and potentially criminal charges. But worse than that, it was about losing control of the narrative she'd spent 3 years as HOA president carefully constructing. "Brad, we can discuss this reasonably," she began, but he was already circling his car, documenting the damage with his phone camera. "Reasonably? You want to discuss this reasonably?" He turned the camera toward her, and Karen instinctively stepped backward. "Say hello to my insurance company, Karen, and my lawyer, and probably the evening news." The morning sun climbed higher, and with it, Karen's growing realization that her perfectly ordered world was about to become very, very complicated. 3 hours later, Karen sat in her pristine living room, watching through her plantation shutters as a tow truck hauled away Brad's Tesla. The police had come and gone, leaving her with a citation for vandalism and a court date circled in red on her calendar. But the real damage was just beginning. Her phone buzzed incessantly. Text after text from her fellow HOA board members, each message more incredulous than the last. "Karen, please tell me the security footage is wrong." "Susan, Channel 7 News just called me." "Channel 7. Robert. My husband says he can recommend a good criminal attorney." "Margaret, Karen set the phone face down on her marble coffee table, but the buzzing continued like an angry wasp trapped under glass. She'd spent the morning trying to control the story, calling it a property dispute and a misunderstanding about community standards. But Brad had already uploaded the security footage to the neighborhood Facebook group. The grainy video of her hurling the boulder had been shared 47 times in the past hour. The doorbell rang with the aggressive persistence of someone who wouldn't be ignored. Karen peered through the peephole to see Jennifer Martinez, the HOA vice president, standing on her doorstep with crossed arms and a face like thunderclouds. "Jennifer," Karen said, opening the door with forced cheerfulness, "I'm so glad you came by. We need to discuss damage control strategies." "We need to discuss your resignation," Jennifer interrupted, pushing past Karen into the foyer. "The entire board met this morning. Emergency session. We're calling for a vote of no confidence." Karen's composure cracked like old paint. "You can't do that. I've been president for 3 years. I've increased property values by 12%. You've thrown a boulder through a resident's car windshield." Jennifer's voice echoed off the vaulted ceiling. "Do you understand the liability exposure you've created? Our insurance company is already asking questions." "It was a measured response to repeated violations," Karen said, but the words sounded hollow even to her own ears. "Brad Morrison has been flagrantly disregarding community standards since he moved in. Someone had to take a stand." Jennifer stared at her with a mixture of pity and disbelief. "Karen, listen to yourself. You're talking like this was some kind of noble sacrifice. You committed a crime. On camera. Against a neighbor whose only violation was parking in the wrong spot. It wasn't just parking." Karen's voice climbed an octave. "It was about respect. It was about the social contract that keeps this community functioning. Do you know what happens when people think the rules don't apply to them?" "I know what happens when the person enforcing the rules thinks she's above them," Jennifer shot back. "We get lawsuits. We get negative publicity. We get our insurance rates jacked up because our HOA president has anger management issues." The accusation hit Karen like a physical blow. She sank onto her designer couch, suddenly aware of how exhausted she felt. When had she last slept through the night? When had she last gone a day without checking for violations, without feeling that familiar knot of anxiety about the community's declining standards? "I don't have anger management issues," she said quietly. "I have standards. Someone has to care about maintaining this place." Jennifer's expression softened slightly. "Karen, caring about the community is one thing. What you did this morning, that's something else entirely. That's not caring, that's obsession. And it's dangerous." The phone buzzed again. Karen glanced at the screen and saw her sister's name. She'd been avoiding Linda's calls all morning, knowing exactly what conversation waited on the other end of that line. "The vote is tomorrow night," Jennifer continued. 7 p.m. at the community center. "I wanted you to hear it from me first, as a courtesy. But Karen, even if you somehow survive the no-confidence vote, Brad's pressing charges. This isn't going away." After Jennifer left, Karen sat alone in her immaculate living room, surrounded by the awards and certificates that documented her years of community service. Volunteer of the Year 2019. Beautification Committee Chair 2020 to 2022. HOA President, elected by the largest margin in Willowbrook history. She picked up her phone and finally answered her sister's call. "Linda," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Oh, honey," Linda's voice was warm with concern. "I saw the news. Are you okay?" Karen wanted to say yes, wanted to maintain the facade of control she'd perfected over the years. Instead, she found herself crying for the first time since her divorce. Ugly, shoulder-shaking sobs that seemed to come from someplace she'd locked away years ago. "I don't know what's wrong with me," she gasped between tears. I couldn't let it go. I couldn't let him think the rules didn't matter." "Oh, Karen," Linda said gently. "When's the last time you took a vacation? When's the last time you did something just for fun?" Karen couldn't remember. Somewhere between the divorce and the empty nest and the desperate need to feel useful, she'd lost track of everything except the rules. The blessed, predictable rules that made sense when nothing else did. But now even those were slipping through her fingers like sand. and she had no idea who she was supposed to be without them. Part 3. Reckoning. The Willowbrook Estates Community Center had never hosted a crowd like this. Karen arrived 15 minutes early, hoping to set up her defense materials before the residents assembled, but found the parking lot already full and a line of people waiting outside the building like they were queuing for concert tickets. She clutched her briefing folder. 3 years of violation statistics, property value increases, and community improvement initiatives. But her carefully prepared speech felt increasingly irrelevant as she watched her neighbors file past. Some avoided eye contact. Others whispered behind their hands. A few actually pointed. The meeting room buzzed with the electric tension of impending spectacle. Karen had presided over dozens of HOA meetings in this same space, but she'd never seen it this packed. Folding chairs had been pulled from storage to accommodate the overflow crowd. Someone had even brought popcorn. "All right, people, let's get started," Jennifer called from the front of the room. As vice president, she was chairing tonight's proceedings. Karen sat alone at the board table, separated from the audience by a gulf that felt wider than the Grand Canyon. Brad Morrison sat in the front row, his arm in a sling. A theatrical touch, Karen thought bitterly, since he hadn't been anywhere near the car when the boulder hit. But she had to admit it was effective. He looked like a victim of her violence, rather than a serial parking violator. "We're here tonight to address the events of Monday morning," Jennifer began, "and to vote on a motion of no confidence in our current HOA president, Karen Whitfield." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Karen stood, her legs shakier than she'd expected. "Before we begin," she said, her voice carrying the authority she'd honed over 3 years of presiding, "I'd like to address the community directly." She opened her folder, but found herself looking past her prepared remarks to the sea of faces before her. These were her neighbors. People whose homes she'd inspected, whose violations she'd documented, whose property values she protected. When had they started looking at her like she was the enemy? "I know what you saw in that video looks extreme," she began. "But what you didn't see were the months of warnings, the repeated violations, the complete disregard for the community standards we all agreed to when we bought our homes here." "So you threw a rock at his car?" someone called from the back. "It was a boulder," Karen corrected automatically, then immediately regretted it. "What I mean is, yes, I escalated the situation beyond what was appropriate, but I want you to understand why." She abandoned her folder entirely, speaking from somewhere deeper than her prepared talking points. 3 years ago, when I became president, this community was falling apart. We had broken streetlights, dying landscaping, and a board that met once every 6 months. I changed that. I implemented systems. I created standards. I made this place somewhere we could all be proud to live. The room was quiet now, listening despite themselves. But somewhere along the way, I stopped seeing you as neighbors and started seeing you as problems to be managed, violations to be corrected. Karen's voice caught. "I forgot that rules are supposed to serve people, not the other way around." She looked directly at Brad, whose expression had shifted from anger to something approaching curiosity. "Brad, I owe you an apology that goes far beyond paying for your windshield. I let my need for control turn me into someone I don't recognize. Someone who throws boulders at cars instead of having conversations with neighbors." "What about the lawsuit?" Brad asked. "What about the criminal charges?" Karen straightened her shoulders. "Those are consequences I'll have to face. But first, I want to face this community and take responsibility for letting you down." She turned back to the crowd. "I'm withdrawing my name from tonight's vote. Effective immediately, I'm resigning as HOA president." The room erupted in surprised chatter. Jennifer banged her gavel for order, but Karen was already packing up her folder. "Wait," called Mrs. Chen from the middle of the room. "What happens to the community garden project? And the new playground equipment?" "The board will handle those initiatives," Karen replied, "probably better than I would have." As she walked toward the door, Brad Morrison stood up. "Karen," he called. She turned back, expecting another accusation or demand for compensation. Instead, he said, "For what it's worth, you were right about the parking thing. I was being a jerk about it. I didn't expect you to throw a boulder at my car." Karen managed a small smile. Next time, maybe I'll start with a strongly worded letter. Next time, Brad said, maybe I'll just answer my phone. 3 weeks later, Karen stood in her front yard, planting marigolds in a flower bed that violated at least 6 HOA regulations. The flowers were too bright, planted too close to the property line, in a bed that extended beyond the approved landscaping boundaries. But Jennifer, the new HOA president, had simply waved when she drove past that morning. Her phone buzzed with a text from Linda, still coming for lunch Sunday. The kids are excited to see Aunt Karen. Karen smiled, wiping soil from her hands. She'd forgotten how satisfying it felt to get dirt under her fingernails, to create something imperfect and beautiful and completely her own. She was halfway through texting back when she spotted it. Mrs. Peterson's garbage can, sitting a full day early at the curb, positioned at least 4 inches too far into the street. Karen felt the familiar tightness in her chest, the automatic urge to document the violation, to maintain order, to fix what was broken. Her fingers hovered over her phone, ready to fire off a message to Jennifer about enforcement protocols. Instead, she deleted the text and finished planting her gloriously non-compliant marigolds. But as she carried her gardening tools back to the garage, she couldn't help but notice that Mrs. Peterson's lawn was looking a little overgrown too. And was that an unauthorized bird feeder in the Johnsons' front window? Old habits, Karen reflected, die hard. The question was, which habits would win?